So I woke up on this particular morning and I was feeling really good. It was one of those mornings where you don't even have to hit the snooze, you just hop right out of bed and you feel like conquering the day. That's what kind of morning this was for me. Not this morning, but this morning was actually a little rougher. I didn't get too much sleep last night. But anyway, this particular morning, it was just a good morning. You've maybe felt some of those before. And I was excited, so I hopped out of bed and I was ready. I was ready for the day. So I thought, me and my wife, we have a dog, and so at the time the dog was about 4 to 5 months, and we were keeping the dog in her kennel in our house, and so I went to let the dog outside to use the restroom, but I realized pretty quickly that our dog would not be needing to use the restroom that morning because she had already used the restroom in her kennel, on her bed, and pillow, and blanket. And not just number 1, but number 2. And if there's such thing as number 3, she took it to that level as well. And so it's safe to say that I was not expecting what I found in that kennel that morning. It was very unexpected, and the way I felt about the day ahead definitely shifted. I was no longer very excited about the situation that was before me. What followed was a series of very intense emotions, followed by some grunting and maybe even some yelling, and so not my best response to a circumstance. My wife runs in the room and is wondering what's going on. Why are you so emotional right now? Like it's 7:30 in the morning. What could have happened, so early in the morning? And I won't even get into details as to which one of us cleaned up the mess, because you would probably think less of me as a husband and as a man. It was not my best moment, it's safe to say. I totally blew it. I responded to the situation in probably the most fleshly way possible. I mean, that's just the best way I can put it. I just blew up. And I realized there's nothing I can do now. I mean, I already blew up. All I can do now is look back and kind of learn from the experience, learn from my response. I mean, I wish I could go back in time and change how I responded, but we've learned that you can't go back in time and change your failures, but you can learn from them, and that's something I've learned is very key in marriage, learning from failures. So I went back and I thought to myself, okay, what went wrong? Because that was horrible. And I came to the conclusion that when it came to this situation, I had walked into an unexpected event that I was unprepared for. Let me say that again. I walked into a situation that I was unprepared for. I'm going to be talking this morning about the issue of what I like to call preparation, and that's not my Texas slang coming out, that's intentional. Preparation, and basically that means what it sounds like. It's a preparation, a prayer life that prepares you for life. It's preparation through prayer. It's pretty simple. Because life is unexpected, as you've probably learned. You don't always expect what's going to happen, and preparation is key when you don't know what's coming. My friend Mike Johnson here, he's active military, and he would probably tell you that when it comes to military lifestyle and strategy, you don't just prepare for what's likely going to happen. You prepare for the least likely scenarios and most unexpected events, so that if and when they come, you're ready. Would I be right in assuming that? I mean, you have to go above and beyond in your preparation when you're involved in military. And for us as Christians, we are involved in a war, and in this spiritual war, we have to be prepared because we have an enemy who wants to attack you when you least expect it. In fact, that's an ancient strategy in military, is that you go after your enemy when he or she is least expecting it. And so Satan is very good at that because he wants to get you when you're not ready. And so we have to prepare. And so we're going to look this morning at a passage that really gives us a good idea of what preparation is all about. We're going to look at the master of preparation, Jesus himself, and we're going to see how he prepared. My text is Luke 22, so if you got a Bible, you can turn there with me. Luke chapter 22. I'll be reading from verses 39 to 46. So this is kind of Garden of Gethsemane moment in Jesus' life. And it says this in verse 39. And he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives. And the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw away, and knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray, that you may not enter into temptation." So there it is. There's our context for preparation. And I think one of the things we can learn right off the bat is that preparation is about routine. The verse 39, it says, he went as was his custom. Now, this wasn't the first time Jesus was going to pray in the Garden of Gethsemane. He had made it a routine lifestyle of prayer, and I think that's really important. In the first session this morning, we heard two amazing sermons on Daniel, and I think Daniel understood the value of routine prayer. In fact, I don't think you can get sentenced to the lion's den and kind of throw up a prayer, a last-second prayer to save you. I don't think that happens. It might, but that's not what we see in that story about Daniel. He had built his life upon prayer, and that had prepared him for what was to happen in the lion's den. So Daniel, great example of preparation. Thank y'all for bringing that message. I was able to use that. So, another thing about preparation is that it is very deeply rooted in temptation. It has a lot to do with temptation. As Jesus says in both verses 40 and 46, he says, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And because the disciples don't pray, we don't really get to see kind of what the temptation is. But I think Jesus, after he says this, he actually goes and does the exact thing that he tells them to do. I think Jesus goes and he prays that he himself would not enter into temptation. And so, what does this temptation look like? I think we see it in Jesus' prayer. He says, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me." So he starts out his prayer with what he wants. He says, "Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." So he starts out with what he wants, what he desires, what his will is. But he follows it up with this powerful statement about, "But Lord, not my will, but yours be done." And I think in that we see the temptation that Jesus is talking about. And I think it's the root temptation of every temptation you will ever face. And it comes down to God's will and your will. That's the temptation. And so we have to wrestle with that. And prayer prepares us for those temptations. If we don't wrestle with that temptation in prayer, when it comes time for that temptation to flesh out and we're not prepared, we fall because our will is above God's will. And so we have to be prepared for temptation. This can be hard. Praying, it can be very hard. As Amanda said, we have this thing called emotion and pain. And, in Luke's account, he gives, the disciples a little bit of credit because usually we think, oh, those disciples are just lazy, like falling asleep on Jesus. Don't you know? We can often think that, but Luke actually adds this word after sleeping in verse 45. He says they were sleeping for sorrow. He adds an element to their sleeping that is very emotional. And I can only imagine, if you think of the emotional context of this story, they had just eaten the Passover meal with Jesus. The table conversation is intense. Jesus talks about how one of the 12 is going to betray him. The disciples are arguing again over who's the greatest. Peter tells Jesus, Lord, I'm willing to die with you. And Jesus responds by saying, you're actually going to deny me. And so that's what's happening before this prayer scene. So very emotional. And so I could see why the disciples could have been emotional and grieved by what was going on. And so as we often do today, we don't pray in the midst of our emotion, but we run from it and we avoid it because it hurts. And it is like a prison. And we don't want to be in that prison, Me personally, when I'm in that kind of emotion, both figuratively and literally, I will look like I'm squirming on the ground like a little worm because I do not like emotion. And as truthful as that is, that's what pain does to us. It brings out the ugly responses. It's what emotion does to us. But Jesus responds to his emotion by praying, which is not appealing in the moment, but we know it's what we're supposed to do. We know that there's something to it. Jesus, he uses his emotion, just like Amanda was saying. God wants to use our emotion to launch us deeper into that place of prayer and connection with God. And Jesus uses all this emotion. Jesus knows what's about to happen. And he uses the emotion of the situation to launch him into a place of prayer where he can set himself up for victory. Because preparation is ultimately about victory. There's an ancient war quote that says this: most battles are won before they're ever fought. Victory is attained before you even enter into the battle. And that's what Jesus is showing us here. I'm going to continue reading the story because I think Luke gives us a good picture of what an outcome looks like for a prepared person, specifically Jesus, and an unprepared disciple, specifically Peter. While he was still speaking, there came a crowd, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? And when those who were around him saw what would follow, they said, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them, as we know is Peter, struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. But Jesus said, no more of this. And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and officers of the temples who were against him, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you day by day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour, and the power of darkness came. And they seized him and led him away. You know what victory looks like for the unprepared disciple? Looks like cutting off the ear of someone who's not even your enemy. Talk about triumphant, right? Shoom, off with your ear. Does that look like victory to you? As his ear falls to the ground? I don't think that's victory. I think Peter was prepared. But we know what the outcome is for Jesus. We know that for Jesus, He ultimately accomplished victory, the greatest victory ever accomplished in human history. Amen. He went to the cross and He defeated the greatest enemy the earth has ever seen, death itself. And so for us, the question is not whether trial and adversity will come, because it will. The question is whether or not you and I will be prepared.